Breaking news out of Detroit and what just unfolded in the past 72 hours represents one of the most catastrophic manufacturing collapses in modern North American history. Canada has officially terminated a $690 billion integrated manufacturing agreement with the United States in what trade economists are calling the single most devastating blow to American auto production since the 1970s oil crisis. We're not talking about minor supply disruptions or temporary production slowdowns. We're talking about 2.7 million manufacturing jobs suddenly at risk, $437 billion in annual cross-border automotive trade frozen overnight, and the entire Great Lakes manufacturing corridor facing potential shutdown within 90 days. The ripple effects are already hitting. General Motors announced emergency board meetings. Ford suspended 3 assembly lines in Dearborn as of this morning. Stellantis sent furlough notices to 14,000 workers across Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana before markets even opened today. In the next 18 minutes, I'm going to break down exactly how we arrived at this critical breaking point, who's paying the real price as families watch their livelihoods disappear, and why leading economists warn this could mark a permanent end to integrated North American manufacturing as we've known it for the past 30 years. The question everyone's asking: how did the world's most interdependent manufacturing relationship implode in less than a week? In the next 18 minutes, I'm going to break down 3 critical things. First, exactly how a single policy decision in Washington triggered this manufacturing apocalypse. I'll walk you through the specific timeline and the economic mechanisms that transformed decades of cooperation into economic warfare overnight. Second, who's really paying the price? Not just the auto executives making headlines, but the assembly line workers, the parts suppliers, the small towns across the Midwest that have built their entire existence around automotive manufacturing. Third, what leading trade analysts and manufacturing economists are saying about where this leads next, including the 6 to 12-month consequences that most Americans aren't seeing yet, but that will reshape the industrial landscape of this country permanently. The question on everyone's mind: why are we destroying the very manufacturing partnerships that made American industry competitive? Let me paint you the picture of what just happened, and I want you to understand this timeline because it matters. On March 18th, 2025, at 3:47 p.m. Eastern Time, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney's office released a 4-page memorandum officially terminating the Canada-United States Manufacturing Integration Agreement. This wasn't a negotiation tactic. This wasn't a warning shot. This was the complete dissolution of a trade framework that has governed $690 billion in annual cross-border manufacturing for 3 decades. But this didn't happen in a vacuum. This is the direct consequence of escalating trade policies that have been building toward catastrophe for months, while economists screamed warnings that went ignored. To understand how we got here, you need to know that Canada and the United States don't just trade auto parts. They manufacture vehicles together in the most integrated production system ever created. A single pickup truck crosses the Canadian-American border 7 to 9 times during production. Canadian aluminum becomes American engine blocks. American steel becomes Canadian chassis. Mexican components integrate into both. This isn't trade. This is a single manufacturing organism stretched across 3 countries, and it represented the competitive advantage that allowed North American auto production to compete with Germany, Japan, and increasingly China. By February 12, 2025, tensions had already reached critical levels. The United States implemented what the administration called corrective tariff measures: 25% tariffs on Canadian steel, 34% on aluminum imports. Across the board, automotive part tariffs averaging 17%. According to the Peterson Institute for International Economics, these tariffs alone added $3,200 to the production cost of every vehicle manufactured in North America. The market didn't just react, it panicked. Then came the breaking point. On March 10th, the United States Trade Representative announced new origin verification requirements. Every single automotive component crossing from Canada would require individual certification proving 75% American content. The administrative burden was impossible. Testing facilities don't exist at the scale required. The verification process would take weeks per shipment. The entire system seized up within 48 hours. By March 13th, assembly lines from Windsor to Detroit to Toledo were running on backup inventory with no resupply possible. Ford's Dearborn truck plant, which produces the F-150, America's best-selling vehicle, had parts for 6 more days of production. General Motors' Oshawa assembly in Ontario shut down completely on March 14th. 2,300 workers sent home. No restart date provided. Canada's response was swift, and it was total. On March 18th, Prime Minister Carney didn't negotiate. He terminated. The official statement was diplomatic. The reality was economic warfare. Canada immediately halted all preferential manufacturing access. The $690 billion agreement that allowed integrated production died instantly. Canadian aluminum producers, who supply 47% of North American automotive aluminum, redirected contracts to European and Asian markets within hours. Canadian auto parts manufacturers representing $137 billion in annual production began negotiations with Chinese automotive companies before Canadian markets closed that day. But here's what makes this different from previous trade disputes. This isn't about tariffs or temporary disruptions. This is about dismantling the physical infrastructure of cooperation. Canadian firms are signing long-term contracts with competitors. They're rebuilding supply chains that exclude American manufacturing. Once these relationships solidify, once Chinese companies replace American partnerships, no trade agreement will bring that capacity back. So how exactly does integrated North American manufacturing work, and why is its collapse so catastrophic? Let me break this down because understanding the mechanism is critical to understanding why Detroit is in absolute panic mode right now. Think of it like this. Imagine you and your neighbor share a workshop. You have the metal cutting tools. They have the welding equipment. Together, you can build complete products efficiently. Separately, you both need to buy all new equipment, learn new processes, and your costs double while your speed gets cut in half. That's integrated manufacturing, except we're not talking about a workshop. We're talking about $690 billion in annual production capacity built over 30 years. The mechanism works through what economists call vertical integration across borders. Raw materials move north. Components move south. Sub-assemblies move north again. Final products emerge from facilities on both sides of the border. This created efficiency. Canadian aluminum smelters, powered by cheap hydroelectric energy, produce aluminum at costs American smelters can't match. They ship south to American casting facilities with the specialized equipment and expertise for automotive engine components. Those components go back north to Canadian assembly plants with labor advantages and different regulatory frameworks, then south again for final assembly and distribution to American dealers. The numbers are staggering. According to the Center for Automotive Research, 63% of the value in a vehicle assembled in Detroit actually comes from components manufactured across the border. Not imported finished products, manufactured collaboratively. The average automotive assembly plant in Michigan sources from 47 different Canadian suppliers. Those Canadian suppliers depend on 93 American component manufacturers. The system isn't American or Canadian, it's North American, and it gave us the ability to compete globally. When Trump implemented tariffs on Canadian inputs, he didn't just raise costs, he broke the mechanism. Suddenly, sending aluminum south for processing and bringing it back north triggers tariffs twice. The same aluminum gets taxed when it enters the United States as raw material and taxed again when it returns to Canada as a finished component. A Canadian engine block manufacturer calculated the math. Under the old system, producing an engine block cost $327. Under the new tariff regime, that same block costs $494. That's a 51% increase. But the manufacturer doesn't absorb that. They can't. Margins in automotive supply don't allow it, so they pass it to assembly plants. Assembly plants pass it to automakers. Automakers pass it to consumers, except consumers are already stretched. Vehicle affordability hit a 20-year low in January 2025. The average new car payment is $739 per month. Add $3,000 to vehicle prices, and you don't just lose customers, you lose market viability. And it gets worse. The tariffs created impossible choices for manufacturers. Do you eat the cost increases and lose money on every unit? Do you raise prices and lose market share to foreign competitors who don't face these costs? Or do you shut down, lay off workers, and hope the political situation changes? Canadian manufacturers made a different choice. They're leaving. Linamar Corporation, one of Canada's largest automotive parts manufacturers, announced on March 19th that they're redirecting 43% of their production capacity to European contracts. Magna International, the third largest auto parts supplier in the world, headquartered in Ontario, informed American clients that long-term contracts won't be renewed. They're pivoting to Asian markets, where relationships aren't subject to sudden political disruptions. This is what economists call supply chain decoupling, and once it happens, it doesn't reverse. You can remove tariffs later, but you can't force companies to abandon the new relationships they've built. China is actively recruiting Canadian automotive suppliers right now. The Chinese government is offering infrastructure subsidies, long-term purchase agreements, and access to the largest automotive market on Earth. Canadian firms that spent decades building relationships with Detroit are getting offers they cannot refuse from competitors who will happily fill the gap America just created. Let me introduce you to people who are living this catastrophe right now, because this isn't about abstract trade policy. This is about families watching their entire lives collapse in real time. Robert Chen is a 42-year-old automotive parts engineer at Martin Rea International in Windsor, Ontario. He's worked there for 17 years, ever since graduating from the University of Windsor with a mechanical engineering degree. Robert's team designs and manufactures precision brake components that go into Ford F-Series trucks assembled 12 miles away in Dearborn. His plant employs 378 people. Average tenure is 11 years. These aren't gig workers. These are careers, families, mortgages, college savings plans, built on the assumption that what they do matters, and that the relationship between Windsor and Detroit would continue. On March 19th, Robert got the email. Production for American contracts suspended indefinitely. The plant is moving to 3-day weeks starting immediately. 57 employees will be laid off by April 1st. Robert did the math on his mortgage, his 2 kids' school expenses, his elderly mother's care costs. He can survive 3 months on reduced hours if he drains savings. After that, he's looking at choices that terrify him. Sell the house they've lived in for 9 years? Move his kids to a different school district? His mother who can't live alone anymore, what happens to her? Multiply Robert's situation by thousands. Martin Rea has 16,000 employees across North America. The components they manufacture can't simply shift to other facilities. The equipment is specialized, the expertise is irreplaceable, the relationships with customers took decades to build. When that capacity leaves, it doesn't come back. Sarah Mitchell is a 38-year-old single mother who works the assembly line at Ford's Dearborn truck plant. She's been there 14 years, working her way up from parts supplier to senior assembly position. She makes $62,000 a year with overtime, enough to support her 2 daughters, pay rent on a modest apartment in Lincoln Park, and maybe, just maybe, start saving for their college. On March 20th, Ford management called an emergency meeting. The plant has parts inventory for 11 more days of production. After that, without Canadian components, the line stops. No timeline for restart, no guarantees about recall. Sarah did the math that terrifies every hourly worker in America. Her savings can cover 2 months of expenses, maybe 3 if she cuts everything non-essential. She started calling other plants, other opportunities. Every single one told her the same thing. They're all facing the same supply crisis. They're all looking at shutdowns. There are no jobs to move to because the entire industry is seizing up simultaneously. Sarah's oldest daughter was accepted to Michigan State. They were planning to tour campus next month. Now Sarah is calculating whether she needs to tell her daughter to defer, to consider community college instead, to adjust dreams because her mother's career in the industry that built Detroit is evaporating. The psychological weight of telling your child that their future just got smaller because of trade policies they can't understand and didn't vote for, that's the human cost economists don't capture in their reports. Michael Torres owns Torres Precision Manufacturing in Toledo, Ohio. It's a 63-person shop that makes specialized tooling and fixtures for automotive assembly plants. He's a second-generation owner. His father started the company in 1983 with 3 employees and a loan against their house. Michael took over in 2009, right in the middle of the last automotive crisis, and he kept the company alive when others failed. 72% of their business comes from supplying tools and fixtures to plants that assemble vehicles using Canadian components. On March 21st, Michael received cancellation notices on 4 major contracts, $237,000 in expected revenue over the next 6 months, gone. The plants aren't retooling, they're shutting down. Michael called his accountant, his lawyer, his bank. The numbers don't work. He can keep the company operating for 2 months on current cash reserves. After that, he starts laying off employees who have worked for him for 15-20 years, people who trusted him, people whose families depend on steady paychecks. Michael keeps thinking about his father, who built this business believing that if you did quality work, if you treated people right, if you served your community, you could build something lasting. And now Michael has to tell 20-year employees that their jobs are ending not because they did anything wrong, not because the company failed, but because trade policies created a crisis that small manufacturers can't survive. Once he closes the doors, that expertise scatters. Those relationships end. The industrial base that took decades to build, that survived recessions and competition and technological change, dies not because it wasn't competitive, but because the political environment made cooperation impossible. And it gets worse, because the scale is so much larger than individual stories. The Center for Automotive Research released emergency analysis on March 22nd. If integrated North American manufacturing actually decouples, the ripple effects hit 2.7 million jobs, not just assembly line workers, tool and die makers, industrial maintenance technicians, logistics coordinators, the truck drivers who move components across borders, the warehouse workers who manage just-in-time inventory, the engineers who design production systems, the accountants who manage supply chain financing, the small restaurants near plants that depend on shift workers, the gas stations, the grocery stores, the entire economic ecosystem built around automotive manufacturing. Communities in Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Wisconsin, and across the industrial Midwest built their entire economic base on automotive manufacturing. When plants shut down, tax revenue collapses, school funding disappears, infrastructure maintenance becomes impossible. These aren't abstract economic shifts. These are towns that go from functioning to failing within months. Let me show you what the experts are saying, because their warnings should terrify anyone who cares about American manufacturing. Dr. Sarah Jennings, lead economist at the Brookings Institution, released a statement on March 22nd that pulled no punches. She wrote, and I'm quoting directly here, "The termination of integrated Canada-US manufacturing represents an irreversible destruction of competitive advantage that took 3 decades to build. The belief that these supply chains can be reconstructed domestically is economically illiterate. The capital costs alone would require $300 billion in investment over 10 years. The expertise has aged out or moved on. The global market has moved forward while we dismantled our own capacity." According to analysis from the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago published March 23rd, the collapse of North American automotive integration will increase vehicle production costs by an average of $4,700 per unit within 6 months. That's not a tariff, that's the cost of operating without the efficiencies that integration created. Consumer prices will rise, demand will fall, American market share will contract. The research from Yale's Budget Lab projects that fully decoupled manufacturing will result in American automotive production declining by 37% over the next 18 months. Not because Americans don't want cars, because American manufacturers won't be competitive at prices consumers can afford while facing competition from integrated Asian and European manufacturing networks. Goldman Sachs automotive sector analysts issued a report March 24th that should be mandatory reading meeting in Washington. They project that Canadian manufacturing capacity redirected to Asian markets won't return regardless of future policy changes. The contracts being signed right now are 7 to 10-year agreements. The capital investments being made to serve new markets create path dependency. Even if the United States completely reversed course tomorrow, Canadian firms have just learned that American trade relationships are subject to sudden political disruption. That risk makes them unreliable partners for long-term planning. Chinese and European partners, whatever their other challenges, offer regulatory stability. Professor Michael Chen at MIT's Industrial Performance Center explained the permanent damage in a March 25th interview. Automotive supply chains require massive fixed investments in specialized equipment, trained workforces, and logistics infrastructure. Once that capacity gets redirected, once those relationships dissolve, once that expertise moves to different sectors or different countries, reconstitution isn't a matter of removing tariffs. It's a matter of rebuilding from scratch against competitors who maintained their integrated networks while you destroyed yours. But here's what really concerns analysts. This isn't just about automotive manufacturing. Canada supplies 43% of North American aerospace components, 52% of agricultural equipment parts, 37% of industrial machinery components. If the pattern of decoupling spreads beyond automotive into these sectors, we're talking about a collapse of American manufacturing competitiveness across the entire industrial base. The timeline experts are projecting should focus minds in Washington, but there's no evidence it is. In the next 30 to 90 days, we're going to see the immediate crisis. Assembly plants will exhaust inventory, shutdowns will begin, layoff notices will multiply, local unemployment numbers in automotive-dependent communities will spike. In the 6 to 12-month time frame, we'll see the structural shifts. Canadian manufacturers will finalize contracts with Asian partners. Equipment will be sold or relocated. Trained workforces will scatter to other sectors. The physical infrastructure of integration will be dismantled. But here's what really concerns analysts looking at the permanent consequences. Once Asian manufacturers fill the supply chain gaps, once Chinese companies replace American partnerships, once Canadian capacity redirects to serving other markets, the competitive landscape fundamentally changes. American automotive companies will face Asian competitors who have integrated supply chains while operating with fragmented, expensive, domestic-only production. Market share will shift, production will move. The jobs won't come back because the structural advantages that made North American manufacturing competitive will be gone. According to the International Trade Commission, automotive manufacturing supports 23% of American manufacturing GDP. Lose competitiveness in automotive, and you trigger cascading effects across the entire industrial sector. Steel demand falls, aluminum demand falls, plastics, electronics, machinery, transportation, all the supporting industries that depend on automotive manufacturing scale face contraction. This isn't a recession. This is permanent industrial decline. Let me recap the 3 critical points you need to understand about what's happening right now. First, who pays? It's not politicians in Washington or executives in boardrooms. It's Robert Chen watching his career evaporate, Sarah Mitchell trying to figure out how to tell her daughter college might not happen, Michael Torres facing the death of his father's life work, and 2.7 million workers across the industrial Midwest watching their livelihoods disappear because trade policies destroyed the manufacturing partnerships that made their jobs viable. Second, the scale. This isn't about temporary disruptions. Canada terminated $690 billion in integrated manufacturing agreements. Canadian firms are signing long-term contracts with Chinese companies. Assembly plants across Michigan, Ohio, Indiana are running on days of remaining inventory with no resupply possible. Vehicle production costs are projected to rise by $4,700 per unit. American automotive production could decline by 37% over 18 months. These aren't projections. These are consequences already in motion. Third, the permanent damage. Once Canadian manufacturing capacity redirects to serving Asian markets, once Chinese companies replace American partnerships, once the expertise and infrastructure of integrated production gets dismantled, no trade agreement brings it back. You can remove tariffs, but you can't force companies to abandon the new relationships they've built. You can't recreate 3 decades of integration overnight. American automotive manufacturing faces structural disadvantage against competitors who maintained integrated supply chains while we destroyed ours. If this analysis resonated with you, if you want to stay informed about economic policies that affect real families and real livelihoods, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This channel exists because you support independent analysis that doesn't ignore the human costs of political decisions. Here's what keeps me up at night. We're not just losing manufacturing capacity. We're not just losing jobs. We're losing something far more valuable. We're losing the relationships, the trust, the cooperative frameworks that took generations to build. Canada isn't just terminating contracts. They're learning that American partnership comes with political risk that makes long-term planning impossible. Once that trust breaks, once that reputation for reliability shatters, once trading partners decide that building economic dependence on American markets is too risky, no amount of policy reversal rebuilds what we just destroyed. And once Asian manufacturers fill those gaps, once Chinese companies become the preferred partners for Canadian capacity, once the integrated manufacturing ecosystem that gave North America competitive advantage against Europe and Asia gets dismantled, America's position as a manufacturing power doesn't recover. The question we should all be asking is this: how many more families need to lose everything before we admit that destroying the partnerships that made American manufacturing competitive doesn't protect American workers, it eliminates their livelihoods? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.